What if Lee Harvey Oswald had simply overslept on November 22nd, 1963? Imagine the alarm didn't go off, coffee spilled on his shirt, and he gave up and decided, this Kennedy, let him drive around in that convertible. Or even better, what if John F. Kennedy, known for his charm and love of good suits, had simply worn a bulletproof vest under his famous jacket? After all, something stronger than cotton had already been invented in the 60s, hadn't they? One small twist of fate, and the whole story could have gone in a different direction, like an old Cadillac that slipped out of control on the Texas roads. This topic is a real magnet for those who like to play with the idea of what if. Because JFK is not just a president with a good hairstyle and charisma that made TV sets crackle with the delight of housewives. He is a man whose death marked the line between before and after for America and the world. The Cold War, the space race, civil rights, everything hung in the balance. And we still debate whether he would have been the one to strengthen that balance or cut it off with one careless move. And let's face it, there's something funny about the way historians have been poring over every scrap of paper from his desk for years, as if it were a map to treasure, not just a note to buy milk. And you know what's the funniest part? At the time when Kennedy was driving around in open cars and beaming with a smile, half of his advisors must have secretly dreamed of wrapping him in a blanket and keeping him away from the windows. But he was not the type to hide. He loved risk, he loved the public, he loved life. And that is why it is so interesting to imagine what he would have done with this energy if he had been given another 5 or 10 years. It's not just a game of alternate history. It's a chance to look at the world through the eyes of a man who could have changed it if fate hadn't played tricks on him on that sunny day in Dallas. So there's a story ahead that's hard to put down. Why is it interesting? Because we are all detectives at heart. We like to dig into the past and imagine how one little thing could have changed the world. What if JFK had lived to see his second term? Would we still be stuck in the Cold War, waving nuclear missiles like neighbors waving lawnmowers over the fence? Or would we be living in a world where people could go to Mars and not just dream about it over coffee? Ahead is a story that is hard to put down. Not because there will be dragons or aliens, although Khrushchev sometimes behaved as if he were from another planet, but because it is about you and me. How we would have lived if that day in Dallas had simply passed quietly, without a shot being fired. So sit back, grab your coffee, and let's unwind this ball of tissue. So, on November 22nd, 1963, John Fitzgerald Kennedy gets out of his car in Dallas, smiles at the crowd, waves, and nothing happens. No shots fired, no chaos. Oswald is probably sitting in a diner somewhere, complaining about cold fries and muttering that, "No one would have believed I did it myself anyway." Kennedy returns to Washington, a little bewildered, but alive and ready to spin the political wheel further. And this is where the fun begins. The first thing that changes is Vietnam. In the real world, Lyndon Johnson, Kennedy's successor, got into this war up to his ears, like a farmer who decided that a swamp was the best place to walk. But JFK, by all accounts, was not eager to send American boys into the jungle. He was a cautious player. He loved beautiful speeches about freedom, but he was in no hurry to throw half the army into battle. So let's imagine that in 1964, he slowly withdraws advisors from South Vietnam, puts pressure on diplomacy, and perhaps even concludes a shaky peace with Ho Chi Minh. Without escalation, there are no mass protests, no war on television, and American youth in the 60s danced to the Beatles rather than burn summonses. Of course, hippies still appear, of course, but their slogans are more about love and flowers than down with the war. And what about the Cold War? Here, Kennedy plays like a chess player with a good haircut. After the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, he had already shown Khrushchev that he could bluff better than any poker player in Las Vegas. In our alternative history, he presses this advantage. More negotiations, less threats. Khrushchev, by the way, could have stayed in power longer without the failure in the Caribbean and with a living Kennedy who would have annoyed him but not driven him mad. Imagine their meetings. Khrushchev slams his shoe on the table. Kennedy smiles ironically and says, "Nikita Sergeyevich, let's mix vodka and whiskey and solve everything." And who knows, maybe by the end of the 60s we would have seen the first nuclear arms reduction treaty instead of waiting until the 70s. Space is a different story. JFK loved the idea of new frontiers, and without his death, the space program could have moved forward even faster. In reality, we landed on the moon in 1969. But imagine, with Kennedy's second term, NASA gets more money, and the USSR squeezes everything out of its engineers to keep up. The result? By 1975, the Americans were building a lunar base, and Soviet cosmonauts, gritting their teeth, landed nearby and offered to play chess in zero gravity. The irony is that instead of the Cold War, we could have a space friendship with mutual jabs, of course, but without missiles in Cuba. And what about domestic America? Civil rights is where Kennedy could have become a real legend. In the real world, he moved cautiously, balancing between Southern racists and activists like Martin Luther King. But with a second term and without the pressure of the Vietnam War, he could have gone all in. Imagine, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is passed faster and more rigorously, and Kennedy, relying on his charisma, travels around the country and convinces even the most hardened conservatives. Of course, not without resistance. Some would still be shouting about the end of America, but without the Vietnam chaos, the 1960s could have been an era of reform, not division. And yes, Bobby Kennedy, his brother, might not have run for president in '68. Why would he if his older brother had everything under control? By the way, how would the policy of his successors have changed? Without the tragedy in Dallas, Johnson would not have become president, which means that his Great Society, a program of social reforms, either did not appear or look different under Kennedy's leadership. Imagine this. Instead of cumbersome anti-poverty projects, Kennedy focuses on education and technology, throwing money at universities and laboratories. Republicans grumble that he is turning America into a campus, but voters, especially the middle class, are delighted. Their children attend the best schools and watch another astronaut wave from orbit on TV. Technology and culture would also have felt the difference. Without Vietnam, the U.S. economy wouldn't be spending billions on war, and Kennedy, a lover of progress, could have spurred innovation. Computers that were the size of a closet in the 1960s could have become desktop computers more quickly. Imagine Silicon Valley engineers, inspired by the president's speeches, inventing something like the early internet by 1980. And culture, without the trauma of Vietnam, Hollywood is making fewer depressing dramas and more optimistic movies about space in the future. Instead of Apocalypse Now, there's Moonwalk, where a Kennedy-esque hero smiles into the camera and says, "We did it, my friends." Of course, not everything would have been perfect. Kennedy had enemies. The mafia, the CIA, even some generals in the Pentagon looked askance at him. One of them might try again. But let's assume that this time the security is better, and the president himself stays out of the open cars. The irony is that his survival might have made America calmer, but also a little more boring, without the wild 60s we know. By the end of the 70s, the world looks different. The Cold War is slowly melting away, space is becoming a new arena for competition, and America is a country that has escaped many traumas. Kennedy retires in 1969, writes a memoir, a bestseller of course, and we, sitting in 2025, look back and think, what if that day in Dallas had really been quiet? Here we are, a world where John F. Kennedy lived to be gray, the Cold War became more like iced tea, and the moon became a tourist destination for wealthy eccentrics. America avoided Vietnam, civil rights flourished earlier, and technology might have given us smartphones before we could dance to disco. The USSR would still be bursting at the seams, Kennedy or no, but even his charisma wouldn't save the planned economy. The irony is that we could live in a world where Khrushchev and Kennedy are still arguing about corn and space and retirement, and we watch their debates on TV and laugh. What stubborn old men. But what does that say about us? The real world is as fragile as that convertible in Dallas. One bullet, one day, and everything goes awry. Our history is not a monolith, but a puzzle, where every piece could have been put together differently. And while we can't change the past, thinking about what-ifs reminds us that even small decisions matter. Maybe that's why we love these stories so much. They give us a chance to at least imagine fixing what went wrong. So imagine yourself in this alternative 2025. You're drinking coffee from a moon ceramic, reading Kennedy's memoirs and thinking, oh, he screwed things up. Would that world be better? Who knows? But it would definitely be interesting and maybe a little more fun without all that gloomy 60s. So if you enjoyed playing with these what-ifs, give us a like. It's a sign that we're on the right track. And subscribe, because there are many more stories ahead where we'll figure out together how history would turn around. Let's not stop. Next time, maybe we'll save someone else from the past.